Welcome to the Digital Culture Podcast, a podcast for people working in the creative and cultural sector and want to know more about digital. I'm your host, James Akers. Welcome to episode 6 of the Digital Culture Podcast. We're recording this on the 8th of April 2025 on a very, very warm day. I'm very hot in my office today. I'm James, one of the tech champions at the Digital Culture Network. My specialist area is data analytics and insight. Today I'm wearing a green t-shirt. I've got a very red face because I've been out in the sun. Middle-aged white man. Well, middle-aged red man at the moment with brown hair. So my guest today, he lives in my hometown of Leicester. He's our tech champion for websites, Mr. Andy Leitch.
Hello, James. You're correct. I'm based in Leicester. Not from Leicester originally. Anglesey in North Wales, in actual fact. But yeah, based in Leicester now. And yeah, 3 years at the Arts Council, believe it or not, this summer. Prior to that, I was running a digital agency here in Leicester, employing designers and developers and project managers, etc. And yeah, decided to have a career pivot and ended up here, your colleague.
And you're a great colleague to have.
You're very kind. I am a white man. I have got short, kind of greying hair, glasses, and a kind of fashionable trimmed beard.
So you ran an agency for a long time. Does that mean you know everything about websites?
So I've been involved in the web industry, I guess, for a long time, since the Wild West, I suppose, the early days, the mid-90s when I was a young designer. I was in London designing some of the first websites, actually, for commercial brands, which was great fun. And nobody really knew where the web was going. It was all completely new. And we had, dial-up modems. And I did that and then formed my own business kind of many years later and ran that until about 2022, something like that.
And then you joined us. You saw this wonderful opportunity and thought, that's the team.
I got headhunted. I changed my LinkedIn profile to open to work. And then these recruiters came out of the woodwork, which was not something I expected, but it was quite nice. Never looked back.
How have you seen websites change then since the early 90s when you first started getting into it through to now?
It's massive. It's massive. And on occasion, in fact, I had an incident last week where I was working with this guitarist, a Greek guitarist, and she had a website which was built using old style HTML pages. And when she needed to make a change, she'd have to email somebody and somebody would have to change the HTML and upload it. And of course, it's all not like that anymore. It's all content management systems, and website owners now have complete control of their content and to a degree the design of their websites through these platforms, things like WordPress or Drupal or Squarespace, etc. So they can make all these changes themselves. But it was not always the case. You used to be reliant on web developers and designers to make your changes for you. So yeah, it's changed. Obviously, from a creative point of view, it's a million miles away from what it was. It used to be the early websites mimicked CD-ROMs and old school media. And it's only, I guess, in recent times that it's almost like broadcast. It's almost like watching TV. So yeah, in the age of broadband where you don't have to worry so much about download speeds, everybody's got a decent internet connection. Websites do look much more immersive and interesting than back in the day where it was mainly Times New Roman 12 point.
I've seen that change over that period as well. Websites used to be really creative, didn't they? Like wildly different. When we talked about homepages, usually there was you used to have to enter a website.
It was like the cover of a book, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think from an accessibility point of view, there's standard formats now of where a logo is expected to be, where a menu is nowadays. But way back when, it was all over the place.
It was chaos. You just stick your navigation on the right and just keep your fingers crossed people could use it. There are conventions, like you say, everybody knows where the navigation typically sits and all the rest of it. There are patterns now that are broadly followed. Yeah, the design is a little bit more standardized. The approach is quite modular. Whereas, back in the day, it was almost like creating a work of art. You'd create something, you'd upload it. People couldn't use it, but you didn't really care because it looked nice.
Yeah. But it worked on really slow connections, which is good. So with all the different organisations and individual artists that we support, we've got museums, galleries, libraries, artists, musicians. Most of them now have websites, don't they? What kind of support do they come to you for?
I would say that my support requests broadly break into two categories. There's the people who have a website that maybe they're not satisfied with, or they don't have the funds to replace it. So it's a case of trying to make the best of what we've got. It might be we'll make some improvements to it, or they're struggling maybe to use the content management system because they've inherited it and they've had no training. So that's the first kind of category, and that's quite common. The second category is where the website needs to be replaced, either because the relationship with the supplier's broken down, or they've rebranded, or the organization or the artist has pivoted in what they're producing. I'll help them through a process of replacing that website. And for junior marketing people, that might be something they haven't done before, and there's maybe an anxiety around it. So trying to break it into little chunks that they can tackle, starting off with maybe coming up with a brief, thinking about their audiences and their objectives, chatting to stakeholders within the organization, getting some clarity about the direction of travel. And we've got a briefing document which they can use to pull that together. And once the brief has been done, I'll review it, might make some comments, and then they'll circulate that brief to suitable suppliers. In some instances, they may have somebody in mind already. I do encourage them to go out and try and find suppliers who would be a good fit for them, who have maybe got a track record working with similar organizations, for example. But quite often they don't have much of an idea about who would be a suitable supplier, so we can help them with that. From a governance point of view, we can't recommend people, but we can look at, their budget, the functionality required, the details of the brief, and then we can maybe put 3 or 4 potential suppliers forward, and they can do their own due diligence against them, meet them, review their work, take references, etc. And that just puts them in a much better place to get a good partnership going. When I first started in this role, it was frustrating because I was having a lot of calls where organizations had fallen out with suppliers and they weren't responding to them and things had gone south. And usually it's because they were never the right supplier in the first place. They were never the right fit. They had some money, maybe through funding, and the agency or the freelancer is happy to help them spend that money, but there's no provision for support post-launch, and things tend to fall apart if there's no support that's been formalized. So those are the 2 main categories, I guess. In some instances on larger projects, I'll support beyond the appointment, help just being a critical friend really for parts of the project which they're working on. During the commissioning phase, also, on occasions, I'll sit in on pitches. So for larger projects, I'll be there to provide a bit of a glossary, really, because agencies can be guilty of speaking in jargon. And if they're not marketing people, for example, sometimes stuff gets lost in translation. I'll sit in on the pitches and provide some thoughts, not really obviously making the decision for them, but just maybe flagging bits which I think are potential risks or areas where I think that supplier might be adding some value. And that's really enjoyable, actually, doing that, because it used to be that I was the person doing the pitching and staying up all night the night before and getting my deck prepared and having pizza at 1 a.m. And now it's much more relaxed to be sat there with a cup of coffee, listening to them and watching them present. That's quite nice. And it's quite rewarding when you are helping an organization, or even an artist, actually, where they may have just a few £100 to spend, and that's a lot of money to them, and they're working with a freelancer and they're nervous and they see the results and it's, oh, thanks so much for the advice. I would never have thought that I'd get this result. So that's quite rewarding. And sometimes they'll get back to me and drop me an email to say, we've launched the site, what do you think? We're really happy. And that's a nice closure on what may have been maybe half a dozen cases or conversations down the line.
You did a webinar, didn't you, on finding the right supplier as well?
I did. Yeah, I did. It goes back a little while now. But yeah, I think that was born out of those conversations around, oh, we need to switch agencies or suppliers, the relationship's soured, whatever. And so that webinar was an attempt to provide the ways that they could source the best supplier and just run some sanity check against the suppliers that they're thinking about to make sure they're getting good value for money and creatively the right fit for them. I think that was my first webinar.
So that's on demand on our website if anybody wants to watch that. You keep up to date with these different agencies, don't you? You're always having conversations with them to understand their products and services and things like that.
I am. I think partly because I'm interested in what they can provide to the sector and to the clients. I say clients to our clients, if you like, who are the organisations and the artists we're supporting. but also to get a handle on how the web design and web development process might be changing, because I've been out of industry now for kind of 3 years. And I'm quite keen to keep abreast of what's happening. So I will keep in touch with kind of old colleagues and people who I've known in the industry. And I'll just meet them for a cup of coffee and sound them out about stuff and what's changing and what I should be aware of. So that's really useful. And yeah, the new agencies are popping up. There's a lot of established agencies who service our sector. So it's a case of reviewing their work. And if I think maybe they're a good fit for an organization I'm working with, then I'll put them in touch and they can then make their own minds up.
And there's some changes, aren't there, in the kind of products they're providing? So instead of a one website where you go through the whole process and build one,
Yeah.
there are different options now, aren't there?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. And we've all seen, I think, how technology is changing the way that we consume content. So if you think of something like Spotify, for example, that is a licensed product. So people aren't really buying physical CDs anymore. They are just paying their 15 quid a month and they're just getting a library of music. And that idea of software as a service, it's that idea of you pay a license and you get a service for that cost. And it's actually happening with websites. As you mentioned, there's the traditional model, if you like, whereby the agency will go through a discovery process. They will specify the project. They'll go through wireframing and prototyping and UI, creative design, etc., and then development. And there's maybe a 6-month process. And that's all fine. And you get a highly bespoke, tailored solution for that. But I'm seeing increasingly proposals coming over my desk whereby suppliers are offering that kind of website as a service. So you're buying a pre-built template, set of components, which are branded, and a lot of functionality that you need is already built, if you like, or pre-built. And that's a very rapid way of developing. And you pay a monthly cost. So rather than the traditional model whereby you pay quite a lot of money up front, with a licensed service, you're paying a monthly cost, but obviously you stop paying, you lose your website. There are kind of pros and cons to it. Commercially, you need to balance up. Do I want to spend this money up front for a traditional design and build model, or do I want to spread my costs over many more years and pay more of a license fee? Yeah, it's really interesting. And I was in a pitch fairly recently where there were 2 agencies, one with a traditional approach and one very much with this modular website as a service. And it was really difficult for the organization to choose between them. It was really tough.
Really interesting. I suppose the changes we're seeing with artificial intelligence now, traditionally websites are found through search, aren't they? Through search engines. But now, like Google gives the results within the search page, don't they, at the top, with like an AI summary, so people don't click through to the websites.
I think particularly if you ask a question, you get that at the top. Google will attempt to answer that question. It does still provide links, I think. But yeah, it is interesting. And the whole topic of AI, if you think of a tool, something like Squarespace, for example, which is a one-stop solution whereby you pick a template, you pop in your content, you put a little bit of branding on it and choose some styles, and hey presto, you've got your website. They actually offer an AI route to have your website built. So rather than going out and choosing a template that you think fits your content or the look and feel of your organization, you put in some information, you complete a form, and the AI will generate that website for you, which if you think back even 10 years, that seems completely science fiction, doesn't it? It's actually here and it's available. As in any industry, I think AI is impacting things quite profoundly.
And there are ways to use it from the accessibility side of things. There's tools now, aren't there, that allow you to add alt tags to your images.
Yep.
So describing what the image is about. So it helps that accessibility side of stuff. So I can see really good uses of AI in those ways.
Yeah, I think it's like any use of AI. It'll get you so far. But in my experiences of using AI, it's great for doing a lot of the grunt work of maybe structuring something. But you do need to go in and kind of fine tune it, I think. And with regards to the alt text, AI is maturing at such an incredible rate. I think the alt text, as it stands, is slightly robotic, but I'm sure that's going to change and be more succinct and have a bit more personality. But yeah, it's great efficiency.
So with the cases and support that you offer across the sector, are you seeing any common themes?
One of the things that seems to be popping up more and more regularly on calls is this whole issue of digital sustainability, which is really interesting and fairly new. And it's that idea that I think everybody thinks, oh, if it's digital, it must be great for the environment and it doesn't have a carbon footprint. In actual fact, all of the files, all of the images, all of the video, all of the documents and downloads, etc., that occupy space on your website are all, of course, being held in data centers, which are powered around the world, and they eat up lots and lots of energy. So in actual fact, your website does have a digital footprint, which impacts sustainability. Common advice is to make sure that you're optimizing all your images properly so they're not taking up so much space. I did a webinar on this with Tom Greenwood from Whole Grain Digital about 18 months ago, I think now, and I've written a corresponding article about it as well. So check that out on our Knowledge Hub.
If someone wanted to review the sustainability of their website, are there specific tools that they can use?
There's a few actually. The one that I tend to use when we're doing website audits is one called EcoGrader. And it works on a single web page, and you put in your website address and you get a report back, which gives a kind of a snapshot of your web page, breaking down data usage by scripts and HTML and CSS, and also images and files, etc. So that's a good barometer for how sustainable your website is. You can run it on multiple pages and it gives you a bit of a picture about how sustainable your website is. But there's a few other tools which are coming to market which do a more fundamental review of the website in its entirety. Those are worth keeping an eye out for as well.
So across the sector, are you seeing any other themes at the moment?
I think one of the things I've noticed perhaps in more recent times is, particularly for artists rather than organizations, where the requirements are quite simple and budgets are that much tighter, I'm finding that individual practitioners are using some of those tools like Wix or Weebly or Squarespace and having a go at building the websites themselves, because I think those tools have matured and the templates that you get are that much more kind of well designed and well organized now. So they're going in and having a go. I'm finding that, sure. And even if it's a case of they're thinking about it, I'll jump on a support call with them and maybe spend 15 minutes walking them through the tool. I'm finding that artists are, even if they're not getting stuck in, they're considering using those tools. So I think those tools have more visibility now in the mainstream. There's TV adverts, etc. And I often get an email or a support request, which is, oh, I haven't got any money and my website's no good and I'm thinking about using Wix or Squarespace. Do you think I should do that? And I absolutely think, yeah, give it a go. As long as your requirements are fairly simple and you don't need to have a hugely tailored and customized creative design, then the templates, 9 times out of 10 will probably suffice. So yeah, I'll jump on calls with them and just give them a bit of confidence, and quite often they'll go away and they'll do a fairly decent job on it, and often they'll share me the link and I'll give them some praise and they'll feel good about it.
And what are the biggest downsides of using those kind of platforms then?
I did a webinar quite recently on designing a website on a shoestring, where I talked a little bit about, they're called web builders. They have various advantages, such as the rapid development and the fact that the templates are fairly well designed. I guess the downsides are, if you want to have a visual look and feel, which is highly custom, you want to do something interesting beyond these modular boxes which make up the majority of websites, then they're probably not the right tool for you. You might need to engage a designer to do something if it's highly bespoke. I guess the other downside is they're not portable. So if you spin up a site on Wix, you pay your 10 quid a month, whatever it is. And if you think, oh, for whatever reason, I can't do this on the platform, I need to migrate, then, you can't really migrate the platform. Once you're up and running with it, it's difficult to migrate it to another platform. And obviously, even though it's maybe only £10 a month, once you stop paying your license fee, your website disappears. So you are tied in as well. It's those things to think about.
Some of them offer free plans, don't they? But they're quite limited in their functionality.
Yeah, some of them offer free plans. So WordPress, for example, which is really popular and is pretty omnipresent in our sector, it does offer a free plan, which is its hosted plan, but it carries advertising and it has WordPress banners, etc. And I think similarly, Wix, unless I'm mistaken, has like Wix banners on it. And I think it's worth spending, even if it's just a few quid, to get rid of that. I think from a credibility point of view, it can make a big difference. I was working with a library, a community library quite recently, and they were on WordPress. They were volunteers. They had no money at all. They were on the free WordPress plan, and it was covered in adverts. And I just helped them migrate across to Google Sites, which is a free platform, albeit more simplified than WordPress. But for their needs, it was really straightforward. And they were really delighted. They got rid of all the adverts, and yeah, it was a good result for them.
Nice. And your specialism about websites, it crosses over into a lot of the other specialist areas that we have as well. So mine, which is data analytics and insight,
Yeah.
I'm always talking to people about website analytics and tracking things online and all the different tools and things that they need to do that. We do pass things between each other, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Given my background, my knowledge is quite broad, so I'm quite comfortable talking to many of the organisations across the board, but quite often I'll refer organisations I'm talking to, particularly to Ollie and Jack, because Ollie covers strategy, Jack covers kind of audience insights. So when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, we need a new website," when you start to really dig down a bit and ask them, who you're trying to reach, engage with, and what you know about them, often they'll look a little bit blankly at me. So I'll say, I think the thing to do is just park this for a minute. Let's just move you downstream to Ollie and Jack. Let's get your strategy sorted. Let's get your audience insights covered. And then we can talk about some of the outputs like websites and social and email, etc. But yeah, quite commonly, I will refer similarly to yourself and Monica for search, and also to Karis for accessibility.
Anyone listening, there's no limit to the support you can get from us, so don't feel like you can only speak to one of us. We can take you on that journey, so you can speak to Andy, you can speak to myself and other team members to get everything up and running in the way that you want it to be, and you can learn along the way as well.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, I encourage organisations or artists to book back in with me so I can just keep a track on what they're doing, particularly if they're commissioning a website. Some organisations understand what they need to do and they can take on board a lot of stuff. But if you're working with somebody who's less seasoned, you can very quickly saturate them with information. So it's a case of just chunking down the advice to something that's manageable for them. And I think part of the skill of being a digital consultant stroke tech champion is pitching the advice at the right level, because sometimes you need to really simplify things down. And sometimes you're speaking to somebody who's been in the industry for a long time. They're much more educated, I guess.
And you're a wonderful person to speak to. You've got all this knowledge. And I love the way that you can speak about agencies, because you've been on the agency side. All the wording or things that they're saying that you could be like, what do you mean by that?
That's right. And obviously, first and foremost, I'm representing the organisations and the artists and fighting their corner. But at the same time, to develop a good relationship with a supplier, it's got to be fair and transparent. Financially, sometimes you've got to accept that you're going to incur costs. And a lot of these suppliers are commercial organisations with sales pipelines and figures to hit, etc. So I think just educating the organisations about that as well is sometimes interesting, because maybe they don't consider that.
Do you have any particular areas of focus at the moment for yourself?
I do, actually. One of the things I'm really enjoying is working what are called priority places. Now, priority places is an Arts Council initiative to try to prioritise advice and funding into those areas that perhaps aren't as blessed with such a rich kind of cultural infrastructure that urban places like Manchester and London would have, for example. There's a list of priority places, and within the Digital Culture Network, we're each allocated a couple to focus on. And mine are Nuneaton and Bedworth in the Midlands, and also the East Lincolnshire coast. So I've really enjoyed going to visit those places and speaking to some of the organisations and some of the individual artists there, and just offering our service, because a lot of people still aren't aware that we exist. And I think evidencing that we're doing work in those areas is really good. And I just think it feels like it's the right apportioning of effort to make sure that those areas are given a bit of a helping hand. So yeah, I've been, I think, quite committed to doing that in the last kind of year or so, really.
And have you been out to see anybody?
I was invited firstly to the Blackfriars Theatre in Boston, actually by the Arts Council, for an event up there. And I got an opportunity to speak about the DCN and meet a lot of the people there. And on the back of that, I was able to have subsequent support calls with them and also introduce them to the other members of our team. And that's been really good. As I'm sure you've mentioned previously, you don't need to be a national portfolio organisation to benefit from our service. As long as you're facilitating or practicing creativity and culture in England, then you can speak to us. It's a great service, and I'm always coming across people who haven't heard of us, and it's always a surprise. But yeah, getting them on board is really good.
So other than regular casework that you're doing, what is getting you energized at the moment?
Something that I've noticed actually on LinkedIn is organisations like the Music Venue Trust and Grassroots Music, and they've been highlighting the fact that a lot of live music venues, particularly the smaller ones, are really struggling and they're closing at an alarming rate. And I think that's a real shame, because some of my best times, I think, have been spent as a youngster in those kind of venues. So I am trying to do a little bit of outreach locally to me to speak to those venues and see if we can be of assistance. And that involves actually going to some gigs, which is great fun. So I've been doing that recently, just in and around Leicester, and meeting some of the owners of those venues and highlighting to them that our service is something they can tap into. But in addition to that, there are funding streams within the Arts Council they can also tap into. I've been really energised by that, I think. It's something I'm quite passionate about, and yeah, really enjoying that.
That sounds a lot of fun. As you mentioned earlier on, a lot of people do have a website. What tips do you have for people to just maintain it and make sure it's good?
So part of what I do in the role is website audits. An organisation will come to me and say, oh, can you have a look over our website? What are we doing wrong? Where could it be improved? And I think particularly for things like venues and festivals, when you see a lot of content that's out of date, when they're still publicising events that happened 6 months ago, you lose confidence in the website. You start to think it's not maintained, and you lose credibility as to the accuracy of the information. So I think it's really important that owners of websites just spend a bit of time making sure that their content is up to date. I did write an article actually on this, I think last year, around website maintenance and just spending 15 minutes each day on a series of tasks.
That's really good, that article. Monday, here's 15 minutes. Undertake a general review, blah, 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 blah. And then you've got Tuesday, 50 minutes. It's such a lovely way of spending specific time on tasks instead of being overwhelmed with everything that needs doing on your website.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I wanted to make it nice and tangible and nice and simple. So 15-minute chunks should be something that people should be able to manage. But the other thing to do is make sure that you've got analytics installed, or if not analytics, then some other form of tracking, monitoring. And just don't leave it till the end of the financial year to dash off a report for the board or the trustees. Try and log in maybe once a month, have a look at user behaviour, have a look at traffic, look at search terms, what are people using to find the site, and just have that insight to hand, make sure it's topical, because that can influence the kind of content that you're writing.
Probably guess I absolutely agree with that point.
I bet you do. I'll often say, let's have a look at your analytics and find out, let's have a look at some of your visit behaviour. Often they'll say, we don't actually have any analytics. And I say, you need to speak to James Akers and send them your way.
Yeah, I'll get you set up.
And I think the other thing, which sounds obvious, but some organisations have fallen foul of, and that's just making sure that you keep your website secure. So particularly if you're using maybe something like WordPress, which is a brilliant tool, you do need to keep your plugins updated to avoid vulnerabilities creeping in. Yeah, I guess security is really important. They had to deal with a few instances where sites have got hacked, etc., and it's turned into a world of pain for people. So just invest a little bit of money each month, keeping your website nice and secure. Nurture it like a plant.
Oh, reminds me I need to water mine. So before I wrap things up then, Andy,
Go on.
What's the favourite support that you've provided over the last 6 months?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's so varied. This morning I had a case, it was like 15 minutes. Somebody couldn't put a hyperlink on an image. Nice and simple. Sometimes it's much more in depth. But I think one that I'm finding quite rewarding is an organisation I'm working with who are actually in one of the priority places that I mentioned earlier. So they've got a website. They haven't really got the funds to replace it, but I'm just helping them restructure some of the content. And it's one of those examples I mentioned earlier about chunking up the advice. So we just did a little screen share, and I just opened up, I think it was PowerPoint, and I just showed them how to block out a simple wireframe of content, like the anatomy of the page, and getting them to think not about colours, fonts and imagery and all that emotive stuff, but just thinking purely about the skeleton of the site, what's important. And we just mocked up one page, and it was great because she just got it. And I said, look, for your homework, I want you to go away and work up all those key pages using a mechanism like that. We don't need to jump into WordPress and attempt to do anything at this point, but I just want you to think about the content. And I've really enjoyed working on that case. And the next step is going to be to roll up our sleeves, look at those little mock-ups we've created, and then start to actually design some of those pages. So yeah, that's been a really enjoyable one. And again, it's one of those instances where it's not just a one-off case. It's one whereby you're building a bit of rapport with the person and there's a high level of trust and you're just seeing them kind of blossom as professionals. So that's really nice when that happens.
So just to summarise then what we've talked about today, I made a couple of notes. It seems like there's a broad range of skills in the sector currently when it comes to websites, from starting at the very beginning through to actually tweaking and refining something that's well established. There seems to be solutions for every type of budget. So no matter whether you've got no money or lots of money, there is something that's there for you. And because of your wonderful expertise and all the experience you've had over the last 3 years, you're here to help. All the articles and on-demand webinars that we mentioned earlier on, they'll be in the show notes for this. We're going to put those on the website as well. So if you want to watch those back, I recommend you do. Thanks for joining us for episode 6 of the Digital Culture Podcast with my guest, Andy Leitch.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Jason.
Please remember that if you are in the creative and cultural sector in England, you can get one-to-one support from us for free. There's no cost. It's unlimited. It's tailored to you. So please do get in touch with us. Andy's here to help you with anything to do with websites. Tap into his knowledge. He's a lovely man.